the streets of Sri Lanka, and also in terms of what's been happening after the protesters decided to storm inside the presidential secretariat. So this is what the scene looks like inside the presidential secretariat after the protesters stormed inside the presidential secretariat that was very heavily, that had a lot of police presence, that was very heavily guarded. But despite of that, thousands of protesters who had surrounded the presidential secretariat forced their way in, and this is what the scene looks like, where hundreds of angry protesters have barged in. They forced the president Gotabaya Rajapaksa to flee, and in these videos the protesters can in fact be seen inside of the bedrooms used in the presidential secretariat. The protests in Sri Lanka have clearly spiraled out of control. Many protesters who stormed inside the secretariat were even seen enjoying in the swimming pool there. Unprecedented scenes from the presidential secretariat. The president has, of course, fled from the presidential palace. Unprecedented scenes playing out inside of the presidential secretariat. This is, of course, one of the small swimming pools inside of the presidential secretariat that has now been used by the protesters who barged inside of the secretariat by driving the security guards out. Now remember, what's been unfolding on the streets of Sri Lanka is in many ways the anger of the people that's being expressed because of the acute shortage, the chronic shortage of food, fuel and other essential supplies. The simple fact is, because of the government's lack of financial management, Sri Lanka has run out of its foreign exchange reserves. Without the dollar, Sri Lanka is unable to purchase any food or any fuel. It has resorted to rationing of food and fuel. Fuel is not sold to everyone. There are restrictions on the amount of food that can also be purchased. And this is what has made the people extremely angry. And these are some unruly scenes from inside of the presidential secretariat after the protesters barged inside, and complete pandemonium and a breakdown of the government's order, where the protesters have now virtually taken over the presidential secretariat and the streets of Sri Lanka. This is the situation that is presently unfolding, but it's not something that the government could not have foreseen is what would happen, because remember, Sri Lanka has been witnessing protests for a very long time now, and despite the fact that the government has been trying its best to address the crisis, it simply had not been able to address So these are the scenes of the thousands of protesters who surrounded the presidential secretariat early this morning. You can look at the crowd that had completely surrounded the presidential secretariat. The armed security guards at that time were completely powerless in taking on the thousands of people who were demanding for answers and who were demanding for accountability from their government. The president, of course, fled from the presidential palace. And according to reports that we've got, he's been taken to some place, an undisclosed area, where he's being kept safely by the military. But the people have now taken over the streets in Sri Lanka. These are the scenes from in front of the presidential secretariat in Colombo. And thousands of people are out on the streets. They've taken over the presidential secretariat. Ranil Wickremesinghe, who remember had been brought in just a few days back as the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, has been making some desperate statements. He's convened the cabinet and he's also expected to shortly put out a statement. But what can now be said by the political leaders when people seem to have completely lost faith in the government? Now, for several months, the protesters have been demanding that Gotabaya Rajapaksa, the strongman president of Sri Lanka, had to go. The slogan of these protests was Gota, go home. But as part of that, Gotabaya Rajapaksa decided to dig his heels and stay on. But right now, according to in the manner in which things are unfolding, Gotabaya Rajapaksa is in hiding. He was forced to flee from the presidential palace. He's presently being kept in an undisclosed location by the army. The protesters have gone completely berserk. There's complete pandemonium on the streets of Sri Lanka, and it's an extremely difficult situation which the authorities there will have to confront with and resolve, because what is going to unfold in the next few hours is something that needs to be seen, because things can clearly spiral way out of control even from here.